This is From the Pro, conversations with the creators of the Proletariat. Here's Jim Bratton.
Today, we're talking to Bret McCormick. Thanks, Bret, for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.
And this is the Proletariat Podcast. We're coming to you live from the Proletariat. You can hear a little bit of the Proletariat sounds in the background. We're on the, just so you have a sense of our perspective, those of you that have been to the Proletariat, we're on the stage that sort of looks around at everything in the Proletariat. Bret, thanks for joining us today very, very much here at the Proletariat.
And could not be happier that you're interested in talking to me, Jim.
Now, we've got several things going on here simultaneously from you. Your art, your visual art.
Pharaoh's Dream.
I've been so enthralled with your previous background that I hadn't focused in on exactly what your visual art is here. Pharaoh's Dream. Tell us the genesis of how that all got started. We'll talk about the rest of the stuff a little later because there's a whole bunch of different aspects to your show here. So, Pharaoh's Dream.
When I was 20 years old, the first year I was married, I had a dream. And you know how every once in a while in life you have a dream that just sticks with you.
Yeah.
Never goes away. You don't forget it. You think of it every once in a while.
Yes.
It was a cold winter morning in Fort Worth. I woke up early. I didn't want to get out of bed because it was cold, and I didn't want to go to work.
Right.
I look up, and in the distance, I see the gas flame of a Dearborn heater in the living room.
Absolutely.
I fell back asleep. When I fell asleep, I began dreaming almost instantly, and in a brief amount of time, I had this very elaborate dream that I was this sort of titan, you know, like this non-human giant being buried in the earth in a tomb. The gas flame that I had seen became this fire in a brazier. There were attendants that were human that were maintaining my tomb, keeping it in readiness, and that everything that had happened in human history was a result of just me lying in my tomb dreaming. So I woke up 10 minutes later, and I'm like, wow, you know, what a dream. And I told my wife about it, and she was like, yeah, whatever, go to work. So anyway, that dream has always been with me. And since then, the metaphysical literature I've read and the Jungian psychology I've read and everything sort of has, and different bizarre incidents that have happened in my life have led me to believe that consciousness is primary, material reality arises from consciousness. And basically, this is all a dream. And it's very dense because we're all creating it together. What we agree upon becomes very solid.
Well, that comes to be, yes, it is not far from the analogy of that whether we really exist or not, or exist simply as a dream.
Yeah.
In our own cumulative intellect.
Exactly, yeah.
What a dream to have. When you're how old?
I was 20.
Number one, I mean, you're not a kid anymore.
No,
so
I'm 65 now.
It's
been 45 years ago.
Do you just think about the dream, or have you had the dream again?
I haven't had that dream again. No, that's a dream that I had once, but it just really stayed with me.
To have a dream that you have that much recall of is just amazing to me. Oh, all right. So there's your motivation of Pharaoh's Dream.
Yeah. And so a lot of my artwork has a sort of whimsical, dreamlike message behind it. The names that I give to some of my paintings add a layer of, you know, maybe like a punchline to it or whatever, or put a different spin on it. Yeah. I really believe that the aspect of consciousness that we would call God is good-natured and has a sense of humor. And I think that shows up in life all the time if we allow it to. Or we can block it out if we want to put our blinders on and think life is drudgery, you know? So all of my artwork, all of my writing, my films, all of that has a sort of innate sense of humor to it that just kind of built into whatever the storyline or whatever the picture might be.
For our listeners, I will say that Bret has a twinkle in his eye as he tells this analogy in this story. Those of you that know him will recognize it. Those of you that will never meet him, you'll just have to imagine what a delight it is to sit across from you and conduct this conversation. So, hey, a twinkle in your eye as you explain some of this. So, let's talk about some of the visual art. We're going to go into some of you're a multifaceted, creative person. So
I'm kind of compulsive.
Well, and
I have to be creating. It's like, it's just something I do,
There are worse problems.
There are worse problems to have.
Yeah. And they have an active creative mind.
Right.
Since we're sitting here where we can see much of the room, let's just walk in the door. We're going to walk in on the 23rd Street side of the Proletariat. Walk me through the pieces briefly on what you've got on the wall and why.
Okay. The oldest one is the first one you come to. I did that one in 2019. It's called I Got Stripes. And it's a mummy wrapped up and standing against a wall, and it's got the Eye of Ra up over one of his shoulders. Yeah. And I was just taken with the mummy imagery. And at that time in 2019, I was volunteering for a place that would have these monthly art exhibits, and each one would have a theme. And usually the theme was derived from a popular song.
A theme derived from a popular song.
So this song by Johnny Cash called I Got Stripes was the theme of this art exhibit. And I did this painting of a mummy. He's got stripes because the cloth wrapped all around him creates this striped effect. And it was just me being silly and whimsical. But I still had that on hand when a year and a half ago I asked Becky if I could have an exhibition here. And she said, sure, if you wait until July of 2024. And I said, okay, let's do it. So she had commented that she kind of liked that picture. So I took that as inspiration to give everything a sort of Egyptian feel. And we called the collective the Pharaoh's Dream, which I kind of derived from my own dream that I had years ago, that all of this is happening in some otherworldly character's mind.
There's some symbolism worked into these that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. How knowledgeable of Egyptology and that type of thing do we have to be to appreciate what's on the walls?
I cannot say I'm knowledgeable at all, other than I have books of Egyptian art that I enjoy looking at. I started loving Egyptian art when I was in 4th grade at Poly Elementary in Fort Worth, Texas. Oh. Mrs. Bradford taught us about Egypt, and I fell in love with it then, and I've been enjoying it ever since. But I certainly am not an expert on any aspect of it. I just am drawn to the imagery.
Now that we've gone to the to the lack of intellectual depth that you're speaking. So it sounds like what you intend is for people to enjoy, look inside themselves, and have a great time when they look at your visuals.
Right. And I think both our creativity and our enjoyment of other people's creativity often is happening on a subconscious level.
I think so.
And that's sort of my approach to it.
You're willing to offer an unguided tour on this then, basically, where whoever's looking at your exhibit walks through and creates their own internal tour of it. Is that sort of where you're going with this?
Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Now that we've talked about the unguided, let's go back to the guided.
Let's go back to the guided. Okay. The second one is called Tourists.
Yeah.
And that is a scene from Monument Valley in Arizona.
Yeah.
Which is an actual place and an actual column of stone that they tell us was left by ancient glacier movement, but I don't know if it was or not. But in the sky over this landmark is a flying saucer.
All right.
So the idea is the tourists are here examining the planet.
Exactly. The beetle / is that a scarab /
That's a scarab. Now that one is a real hodgepodge piece. It's a textured piece. It's called Egyptian graffiti. And to catch your eye, it's got this very colorful scarab with rainbow-colored wings and everything. It's got an Eye of Horus. It's got an Ankh. But then in hieroglyphics on one side, playing off of the whole graffiti thing, is the phrase Ramesses rules. Ramesses, of course, was a pharaoh of Egypt.
Yes.
And someone has scratched out rules and written under that sucks. But this is all in hieroglyphics, so unless you could read hieroglyphics, you won't know that. And then down in the lower left corner, it says, for a good, and then it runs off the bottom of the page. So you can imagine whatever the Egyptians were writing. For a good time, hop on your camel and go see whoever.
It's just delightful. All right. Next, we've got a larger vertical piece. Tell me.
There's a 2 foot by 4 foot tall piece, and it's a representation of the god Anubis, which I guess he's a jackal-headed god.
Looks to be.
This is actually just a reproduction of something from a wall in Egypt that was discovered. I saw a photograph of it. I just like the way that it looks. He's holding a staff with an ankh at the top of it, but he's also holding the signs of power, the crook, the shepherd's crook, and a flail in his other hand. It's got a bunch of hieroglyphics on it, but I don't know what those mean.
It's okay.
I just duplicated them from the photograph. But I had a lot of fun doing them.
Historical with a sense of whimsy.
Historical with a little sense of whimsy, yeah.
We've got a cluster of sort of a similar coloration. Are you considering that a group right next to it?
They're all red. Becky and I were hanging these pieces, and she said, I like the idea of grouping all the red ones together. And they are very bright, and I think she was right, and the others play off to either side of that. But I have what I call my shadow boxes, and these are discarded drawers that I find on curbs where people have done remodeling, and they've taken out their old cabinetry, and there's drawers on the side of the road. I pick those up whenever I see them, take them home, paint them, sometimes put texture on them, sometimes add things onto them, and I create these shadow boxes. In this case, I did 3 shadow boxes with an Egyptian motif, and the first one is the Eye of Horus. So it's a drawer hanging with its bottom against the wall to create a shadow box effect. And it's something that you can use as it is, or you can actually stick little art objects of your own in there on the shelf or up on top of it or whatever. So it can serve as sort of a shelf. It has kind of a suggestion of being an altar, and I just like the 3D quality of it.
I do too, and I like the innovation of repurposing a drawer. That's incredible. Do those come from the same time frame, or is those just different times you found drawers?
2 of those drawers I found on the same curb. The one with the hand in it,
right?
There's a blue sky hand with an ankh on it, and then there's a gold ankh behind it.
Right.
And that one is called Unemployed Deity Will Work for Adoration.
God, your titling is priceless. I'm just stunned. All right.
The one at the top, that's an image of Hathor, who was sort of a very powerful Egyptian goddess. I don't know why I'm drawn to her. I think of her, she may not be, but in my mind, she's sort of similar to Kali, the Indian goddess. That's sort of a fierce goddess. That's the way I imagine her anyway. Then directly below the Hathor shadow box, I have a representation of Osiris, god of the dead.
Right.
To the right of Unemployed Deity, I have a red field with a blue scarab on it, and that's just kind of a pretty traditional rendition of the scarab, which is another symbol of everlasting life for the Egyptians. Below that, there's a red canvas that has, in hieroglyphics, basically the meaning of it is peace and divine unity.
You know, there's a lot of pauses on my part because I'm envisioning how to create wall space at our place for a number of your pieces here. They're very intriguing.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
They just want to go onto your space. Next to it is a good-sized piece.
Yeah, another 2 foot by 4 foot tall, mostly blues and grays. It's a representation of Hathor, the goddess Hathor. She's got sort of an Aten symbol that's associated with her, which is kind of like a U-shaped set of horns with a disc in between.
Yeah.
That's her symbol. She's very voluptuous. She always has a snake in her left hand that's coiled around her wrist. And I always draw her without pupils or irises. She just has white, glowing eyes, because that's the way I think of her, as more of an energy entity rather than a flesh and blood thing.
What a great way to make that distinction. Scarab next to it.
Yeah, that's my scarab number 2. I really like the scarab imagery. I would have done a bunch of them, but I thought I can't have more than 3 scarabs. So I was sitting in my garage thinking, what should I do? I got this probably 20 by 24 canvas, something like that. And I just happened to glance over and I saw this pile of leftover Christmas wrap. And one of them was a gold foil wrap. So I started tearing the gold foil into bits and patching it together and gluing them together onto the canvas. And then I painted the scarab on top of that. So the background is sort of a tarnished gold look that really catches the light. A lot of people have commented on it. And I think the effect just wasn't something I planned. It just kind of spontaneously happened. I think it came off pretty well.
Adjacent to that is a piece that jumps back to the, in general look, to the second piece here.
Right. That's another Monument Valley scene. It's an actual scene from Monument Valley that I painted. But in this case, there are pyramids in Monument Valley. So in the background, you can see 3 pyramids, as if Monument Valley in Arizona had pyramids at some time, or will have pyramids at some time.
That is not out of the question. And one more that's behind the post that I could barely see.
Okay, that's another tall, narrow one. I had run across in my research of mummies the idea that every once in a while they found mummified animals and stuff like that, but they also found mummified deformed humans. They were actually mummified, but it was clear that they had been born with either, maybe they were dwarves, maybe they had other sorts of skeletal malfunctions. And that was fascinating to me because, of course, anyone can love their child regardless of its physical capabilities or whatever. And who was it that mummified this child that was deformed? And, what were they thinking and what was the intention? All of that is very fascinating. It's an unanswered question that I was just kind of examining. So I've got this sort of deformed little mummy in a sarcophagus with some hieroglyphs around it.
Wow. We've made our way through the big wall, which just is an incredible journey. To our listeners, take your time when you walk past that wall. Wow. Above our newly established THC wing at the Proletariat, we've got a couple of pieces.
Yeah, the first one, the yellow board, this was just a shelf or something that I found on a curb.
Yeah.
And I painted it yellow, and then I put some streaks of red paint that looks like drying blood. And then I put a purple sort of ghostly, semi-human-looking head. And the name of it is AI Has No Blood in the Game.
God, that's incredible, too. Your titling of these pieces is as intriguing as the work is almost, you know. And you've got one more, a little bit different over there.
I have a 3D piece that looks like a skull and a femur and some cloth sort of sticking out of the ground as if they've been unearthed. And it's called Holy Relic. And that was inspired by, I had read how, all of these medieval churches would have holy relics that people would come to visit. And it's supposed to be the jawbone of this saint or the tooth of this.
They would divvy up those saints into tiny little pieces, evidently, and everybody would get a piece.
Right.
So, yeah, you just...
that was fascinating to me.
We've pretty well walked through most of the wall art here. We got a little bit down in the alcove as we walk toward the restroom. I think we'll talk about that in our next segment of this podcast.
Sounds good.
When we talk about some other aspects of your creative life. But I want to back up to one thing. Is there a common denominator in the components that represent the assemblage, the way you built this art? Do you have a technique that is repetitive, or materials are repetitive?
Yeah, I really prefer, and this probably goes back to 1996, maybe. I was sort of an apprentice under an artist, an interior designer named Barbara Cannon up in Fort Worth, Dallas area. And I learned a whole lot about art in the 2 years I worked with her. And a lot of what we did was murals and things in the homes of wealthy people. They would buy these nice homes, and they would have a pool, an indoor pool, and they would want the walls painted to look tropical or whatever, you know.
Right.
So we did all sorts of things like that. But I found that I really loved painting on that textured sheetrock. I liked the way it felt, and I liked the way it looked.
Interesting.
After you painted it, and then if you smeared it with a dark wash afterwards, it gave it sort of this ancient look. As a result of that, I began building panels out of plywood and some one-by-ones that would be the frame around it, and putting a lot of spackling on it and texturing it in different ways for different ones, and then painting on top of that, and then covering the whole thing with glossy, clear acrylic. And these are pieces of art that I actually intend for people to touch, because when I see things like that, I want to touch it. Yeah.
You want to put a sign that says, please touch.
After you've bought it. No, I'm kidding.
Touch, buy, then touch.
You're welcome to touch it.
So the spackling is what gives it that unique relief to it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been part one of our Proletariat podcast with Bret McCormick. Wow, what a conversation we've had. We're going to come back and have a second podcast where we deal with some of the other creative aspects of your life, the filmmaking, the writing. To our listeners, please come back for episode 2.
This has been From the Pro, conversations with the creators at the Proletariat. Theme percussion created and performed by Patrick Wheeler, mastered by Chris Criticos. From the Pro is a Jim Bratton production. I'm Sierra Sakel.